My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Okay, I guess we'll get going.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Rich Armstrong. I'm a principal engineer at the Connecticut DOT. And today we have two public working sessions. This one here at 2 o'clock, and then we repeat the session at 5 o'clock. We have a panel that consists of some of our key DOT project team members and also consultant team members from the City of Hartford. And this process is a continuing process where our project team, the I-84 Hartford project team, is working very, very closely with the city. It's a great collaboration. And frankly, it's taken a bit of time to evaluate and think about a variety of different solutions in this very complex area. And primarily, we're talking about the Asylum Hill multimodal station planning area. But there's a lot at play. We're thinking about the street network, the ramp locations, the potential for development, and of course the station, which is a rail station component and a bus station component. So we don't have any answers for you today. We just want you to see where we are, where we've been. We had a session back here in August, and that was very productive. And since then, we continue to evaluate a variety of alternatives and concepts, and we want to share those with you today. I'm going to introduce Mike Morehouse from Fitzgerald Halliday, who will be today's facilitator, moderator, and he'll do some other introductions of who else will be speaking and presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone. So the DOT asked me to facilitate this session today. If you remember back in August, we had a pretty full agenda and a lot of content and probably an overwhelming amount of content. So we want to slow the pace a little bit today. We want to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on and why we've been kind of, I won't say absent, but a little bit incognito for the last few months. Because we've been doing a lot of hard work, and we want to make sure that you fully understand that and help us understand what concerns you still have, what questions you still have, and what your preferences are. We want to move this planning ball forward, and we want to ultimately get to some solutions that we're all pleased with. Before I start, though, I want to introduce our panel of experts. Again, this, as Rich said, this is a combination of DOT consultants and city consultants, and it's really a great team. So all of the experts here are represented today. Please, we want to hear your questions, ask them. They know about this material better than anyone right now because they've been immersed in it. So I'm going to quickly pass the microphone, starting with Jim, and just briefly your name and your role on the project.
Thanks, Mike. My name's Jim Rice, and I'm an architect with Trans Systems, and we've been primarily focusing on the station building, but also the rest of the team has been looking at other components of it. Thanks.
And Gina Tremarca with Trans Systems, heading up the multimodal station planning effort.
David Spillane from Goody Clancy, part of the DOT consultant team.
Casey Harden, Trans Systems. I'm a transportation engineer working on some of the local roads and certainly the highway potential alternatives.
I'm Tom Jost. I run the urban strategies practice at WSP, and I'm one of the city consultants on the project.
I'm Bill Kenworthy. I'm the regional leader of urban design for HOK, and I'm also on the city team partner with WSP.
Ben Carlson, urban designer with Goody Clancy on the DOT team.
I just also want to point out Marcy Miller and Michael Coulomb from FHI doing a great job on the public outreach for this project. Dave Stonke, the project manager, let's not forget. Nick Mandler, Tim Ryan, of course you know Rich. So what I want to do, keep this a little informal, but I'm going to roam around with the mic. If anybody has a question, if there's something that you see up on this on these boards that you don't quite understand or need to ask more questions, feel free. I'll come over, give you the mic, and you can ask the question. We do want this to remain interactive. So the agenda for today looks simple, but again, it's a very complex set of slides we're going to show you. We want to look at the broader road network opportunities that that are a possibility as this project moves forward. I mean, this is a highway reconstruction project, but it's also a transit project. It's also a local streets project. So we want to really look at the broader perspective, and we're going to have the city's consultants lead a conversation on that. We also, though, want to talk about the multimodal station opportunities, and we've been looking very hard at different station locations. We have to make sure this conversation is integrated. We can't really plan one without the other. And then we'll go through some next steps. So before I turn the microphone over to Tom, I just want to frame this a little bit. When we were here, I guess, August, it's about 3 months ago at this point, we told you, we're down to basically 2 highway alternatives. There's a no-build, and there's the lowered highway alternative, which is kind of our best performing highway alternative right now. There are 3 options on the east side of the corridor and 1 option on the west side of the corridor. It's these east side options that we're really going through a finer stage of refinement right now. There's still a lot of trade-offs that we're trying to understand, and it's quite frankly very complicated. So it's, I know we had an original meeting scheduled for about a month or so ago. We had to postpone that till today, but it's because we've been doing a lot of work and a lot of material has been coming forward almost on a daily basis, and we didn't want to come out here prematurely. This is also a great collaboration between all the teaming partners. It took time for the city's consultant to get up to speed and understanding of everything that we've done over the past several years. We're now in that place where we can now work dynamically back and forth, and that's happening, and that's a great thing. It's going to make the project a lot better. And we've also been targeting very specific stakeholders on some of the ideas that reflect, maybe impacts to neighborhoods or to specific employers, and so that's taken some time to go through. And we're going through the technical evaluation of all these things in real time. So there's a lot happening at once, and now we want to bring you up to speed with where we are. Tom's going to tell you about kind of these 4 focus areas in the network, and there's some broader urban design implications, but those red squares are also kind of roughly where the stations are being targeted. A couple north of Asylum, 1 south of Asylum. And we're going to look at the pros and cons of those and how they relate to the overall street network, how they relate to the pedestrian experience, to the development opportunities moving forward. So there's a lot of moving pieces, bear with us. And in fact, many of the graphics you're going to see are still in very preliminary form. That's a result of this iterative nature of planning. But you're kind of here looking over our shoulder at this point. We want to make sure we get it right before we really commit a lot of design work to the final plans. Okay, so from this point, I'm going to hand it over to Tom. We want to hear your comments throughout this process, but I will ask questions if there's something that needs clarification. But feel free to raise your hand if there's anything you want me to pause on, and we'll go ahead and entertain that question. I think you can. Yeah, Casey's going to. Okay.
I didn't do that. So Tom and I are going to sort of tag team a series of slides here as we talk about the road network here in the eastern area of the project. And what I've got up on the screen is what we found to be the best performing of those 3 interchange options as it relates to traffic operations and safety, both on I-84 and the local streets. So many of the things we talked about today, we've really focused on how to improve that. Just to kind of lay the groundwork for some of the future conversations. I-84 is depicted along this path. This is the eastern area of our project area. So this is Broad Street here, Farmington Avenue, Asylum. The highway comes around here underneath High Street and Ann Streets. And this is kind of that depressed section that leads into the Hartford Tunnel in this area. So the proposed lowered highway alternative would be relocated about 250 feet to the west. The existing highway would be about here, so it would be shifted just a little bit to the west to help address this horizontal curve here, which doesn't meet some of our modern design standards and sort of a safety improvement, as well as for constructability. And then as part of that lowered highway alternative, you see this red line work here illustrates the relocated railroad. So today the railroad comes underneath I-84, wraps around Bushnell Park. Union Station would be right about here. and then the railroad comes under I-84 again off to the north. So this lowered highway alternative does rely on this relocation of the railroad to stay on this north or west side of the highway. And then this option calls for eastbound ramps that would come to a new street between Capitol Avenue and Asylum, and then westbound ramps to a realigned Codswell Street. Today, Codswell comes up here. We'd realign it here to connect in where Edwards is over towards Walnut. So what I wanted to do is just kind of lay the groundwork, because our discussions moving forward, and to talk about some ways we've seen to improve that. Now kind of within this alternative, we've got several new or extended roadways that create new connectivity opportunities. The first is that new north-south roadway adjacent to Bushnell Park that I mentioned. We're also proposing to extend Spruce Street. Today, Spruce Street ends at Church Street, so we're proposing to bring it up and around to tie into Chapel Street South, which would create a little bit more continuous frontage road system. And we'd also be proposing a new roadway, which we've labeled as Road B, between Broad Street and that new Road A, or Bushnell Park West. So in addition to those newer extended roadways, we'd be looking at improvements to both Asylum, Broad Street. In all likelihood, the traffic operations will be improved, hopefully in a manner that we can create a more walkable, bikeable, and a better situation for transit users. We do show with this option the disconnection of Broad Street between Farmington and Asylum. We've recognized over some recent meetings that that's a bit of a talking point, and we brought some options to the table that we'll discuss that keep that open. So that'll be something we talk about moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk a little bit about his role here working with the city and what they've looked at doing to improve this alternative.
So thank you, Casey. One of the things that we're trying to do is balance the modification to I-84 with the connectivity of the downtown and Asylum Hill, bringing together those two neighborhoods around this new piece of two new pieces of infrastructure. And as part of looking at the goals and objectives, and in talking with the city, we highlighted some of the objectives that we thought were extremely important. Obviously, the notion of trying to make improved connections, both east-west and north-south, and using those new connections to really establish a strong sense of place. This is an area that sort of sits between two pieces of the city, and we want it to all feel like one connected city. So we need to create this great sense of place in this area. As we bring these new pieces of infrastructure in, we need to build the community around it. And really, in so doing, create this opportunity to enhance and improve economic opportunity in the area, create places that can be seen as economic generators, again, building out the center of the city. And so keeping those in mind, we've been working with the team to try to look at the preferred alternative that Casey just explained and begin to see how some of these opportunities illustrate themselves and can be incorporated into the design. So if you go to, actually I can go to the next slide. So I want to walk through four focus areas. The first two are ones that we feel real strong about, that we've done a significant amount of work on and seen as improvements that really can be tied in to the preferred alternative. And the third and fourth are a little more open, still undergoing a lot of analysis, and certainly all four, we want your input, but that's kind of the stage we're at with all four of these. So the first is this idea of a Garden Street connection. We've looked a lot at the area to the north of Asylum and how might we be able to bring in more connectivity in that area. The second is really looking at the alignment where the off-ramps come in the north, and coming up with a way to push traffic in the right way through that condition. The third is looking at the Trident, what we call the Trident area, and looking at a couple of options for how to explore moving traffic through that area, given a lot of the community, input that we've received in that area. And the fourth is focusing, like in the north, in what we call the South Quadrant, that area where we have that Bushnell Park West Road coming in. How do we create that as a real active part of the city? How do we create that as a real entry point, a gateway, and also a great a place around Bushnell Park? And so we're just going to walk through each of these kind of one by one and talk through some of the improvements that we're considering. First and foremost, this idea of connecting the Asylum Hill back into the community on more streets than just Asylum Street, right in the downtown area. In between Asylum and Walnut, there's really no connection north-south, and we wanted to try to figure out a way to do that. And we think Garden is a real opportunity. It's a steep street, but it really does create a great kind of entry point directly into the current Union Station location. It sets up the ability to break the network into developable sites. It increases sight lines, and we actually think it enhances mobility and traffic conditions. And Casey, maybe you could talk through some of what we see in that regard.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. First of all, it adds redundancy to the network, and so what that does is it allows us to alleviate some of the pinch points in the traffic network, particularly, as many of you are familiar, the kind of struggles we see every day in the Trident area. This adds some redundancy and kind of takes some people off Asylum and Farmington. Now it's a relatively obvious east-west connection, but we're seeing some benefits also from a north-south perspective. That's to say that somebody on Capitol Avenue could come north along that new Bushnell Park West, get to Asylum, and then use that as a way to get between Fraud Hollow to the south and Asylum Hill to the north without having to pass through that really congested Trident area. Now, Tom mentioned the potential grade, the steepness of the roadway. It is going up a hill. It would be about the same grade as Asylum Street is today. That's about 7%. That's just a little hair steeper than the existing Myrtle Street connection, which comes down under the highway today. So it's still a hair steeper than that. And then what we're looking at now is, what that means for the ground in front of Union Station. Because in order to achieve that, we'd raise Spruce Street about 4 feet, right where my red dot is. And we'd come down to meet where Asylum is today, there'd be no change, and we'd meet where Church Street is with no change. So we're in the process of developing additional graphics to help illustrate that, and I'll be working with the State Historic Preservation Office as we look to, document any potential visual impacts to the historic Union Station. All in all, though, we do feel this is kind of a home run for us in this area. Those of you who've been with the project a long time will know that we've been looking for ways to address this connectivity in this area. So something we're really excited about. And as Tom mentioned, that second focus area is up in the vicinity of Myrtle Street. Nick, can you pull up that map? Yeah, so it kind of doesn't show it on this map, but this alternative had led the ramp traffic up Fraser Place. And that really leads you up into a more residential neighborhood in Asylum Hill. Now with a major destination on the other side of that, St. Francis Hospital, that was something some of the folks in the neighborhood were a little concerned about, and something we've looked at a few different ways to try and help mitigate. And ultimately, we kind of stumbled across what we find to be a relatively simple solution, where instead of previously we had Fraser Place would come in straight to the ramps, we now take Myrtle Street and essentially wrap it around. So if you came off the ramps and went straight, you'd follow this curve around. And ultimately, you'd take Myrtle Street to Garden Street, and Collins Street takes you up to St. Francis Hospital just off the page. And that's a little bit more similar to traffic patterns that we have today, and it kind of keeps people out of those neighborhoods. This also has another benefit in that it actually helps traffic operations at this series of intersections, because it reduces the amount of people that have to come off the ramps and ultimately turn left. So it's something that we found to be a really positive introduction to this alternative. And essentially these two things we're kind of viewing now as part of the alternative as we move forward. And then with that, Tom is going to talk about the first of those areas that's still a little bit up in the air.
Casey, just a quick question on that. Would there be a traffic signal at that juncture?
At the intersection of Fraser and Myrtle?
Okay.
So the answer that Nick provided would be no.
So the benefit is the traffic is just free flowing now as opposed to being forced up Fraser? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions on? Okay.
You mentioned the traffic signal. Are you using roundabouts, rotaries at all to calm traffic in any of the
So the question was, are we using roundabouts to manage any traffic at intersections? And I think that segues into a discussion we're going to have here
Yeah,
momentarily.
if you want to walk that microphone over to Nick, I can talk for a few seconds to stall on the way. So yeah, generally in this presentation, we'll look at a roundabout at the Trident, but Nick can talk a little bit about some of the other intersections in the corridor where we do see potential possibilities.
Sure. Just as a little introduction, for those who don't know, we have these big things that we like to call rotaries or traffic circles all throughout New England. And they're sort of the old style, built in the 50s through the 70s. They're relatively high speed, they're not particularly safe, and they handle a lot of traffic, but they handle it in a way that's not really compatible with the downtown city environment. So the new thing is modern roundabouts, which really premiered in Europe a couple decades ago and have gained a lot of traction throughout the US. They have their pluses and minuses, but typically they're considered pretty good for downtown urban environments or even suburban environments because they keep traffic speed relatively steady. They work better than two-way stop signs or four-way stop signs in most cases. And in some cases, they even work better than traffic signals as far as traffic flow goes. As Mike would tell you, there are issues with trucks, but the roundabouts can be designed specifically so that trucks can make it through without any major issues. The drivers just have to be pretty decent at it. So where would we put roundabouts on this project? The short answer is we're looking at them everywhere we can. At every single one of these intersections that I've looked at, every time I do an analysis, I look to see, would it be possible to put a roundabout here? And in a lot of cases, the answer is no, whether the volumes are too high, the grades are too steep, or just it wouldn't be a good fit. We might not have the room available. I think there will be several cases throughout the project where we'll have really good opportunities to put roundabouts in, and that may well be one of them. So it's something we are looking at, we are thinking about it.
Thank you, Nick. So I think what I was leaning towards was turning you over to Tom to talk about the kind of first of our areas where we're still really up in the air and contemplating several options. So we have another question.
Casey or Jackie.
Yeah. Back up to the grades. You were going to talk about the grades. They're similar to what Asylum Street is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes.
In the winter, which only time grades really matter, there are times when buses cannot get up Asylum Street between Spruce Street and that hill there that goes under the highway. So why would you build another street with that kind of grade? I don't understand that.
Sure. I mean, the truth of it is it's going up a hill. It has to start one place and get to a set elevation at the top. We've kind of played around with a couple different scenarios where if we make it a little less steep, then we really have to pull the elevation of this roadway, which is Spruce Street, in front of Union Station up. And so what we're trying to do is to balance that. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's set in stone the way we have it now. I certainly, value the input of your comment. We thought that was kind of a fair balance because it set it equal with a neighboring city street, but it's something we can look at. We could potentially make the grade a little bit less if we raise the elevation of Spruce Street right here in front of Union Station. So that's something we'll look at.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I'll turn you over to Tom to talk about the Trident.
So obviously there's been a lot of conversation about the area that we're calling the Trident, where Farmington and Asylum come together. Under the preferred scenario, the optimal manner for which to move traffic through the area kind of found that if you separated Broad and Cogswell in this area, that was a way to move traffic through the neighborhood in the most efficient and optimal manner. But we have heard that there's a lot of concerns about bike and pedestrian connectivity in that area, that there's a real strong desire to have Cogswell and Broad connected. So what can we do to try to balance what really are a number of different trade-offs associated with this area and try to get this right? So we went back to the drawing board and continued to look at the area. And again, we obviously want to meet the goals that we were shooting for of enhancing mobility, creating connectivity, generating a great sense of place. We also want to make sure we don't have any fatal flaws in the traffic network. We don't want queuing back onto the freeway. We don't want intersections that have a full cycle delay or more. And so balancing those different options, we've really looked at 4 alternatives that we would like to present today and get your reaction to. The first would be what really is the original that we presented the last time, which is what we call discontinuous Broad Street. But we also want to look at maybe there's a way to not have Farmington extend directly into Asylum, but bring Farmington down to Broad. The idea of actually converting that whole section into a roundabout. And then a fourth, which we call the Western Shift, which I'll explain when we show you the drawings. So this is the first, the discontinuous Broad Street. And again, this was the one that became the preferred option because of the traffic performance. And it provided the best opportunity for keeping the streets around the Trident at a more sort of pedestrian scale, less lanes to accommodate, easier to traverse, things of that nature. All very important to trying to create a balance between automobile and pedestrian in the area.
And yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, and so just to speak to that, we feel that does end up adding benefits also to the bicyclists and the pedestrians and the transit users in the area, and that the roadways feel a little bit less auto-dominated. One of the things that I would say too is I just enlarged this arrow here, and that's to try and demonstrate that we would look to keep a bicyclist and pedestrian connection through where Broad Street is today. So it's really, when we talk about it being discontinuous, that's really just for cars or buses.
Casey, really quick, can you remind us why Broad Street would need to be discontinuous?
Sure. So, one of the reasons the Trident set of intersections, so it's really, we're talking about the intersection of Asylum and Cogswell, the intersection of Farmington and Broad, and then where Asylum and Farmington come together, have so much trouble operating well is they're really just 3 intersections that are too close together, and there's a lot of traffic that's trying to come through both up Asylum and up Farmington to get in towards downtown, and then they're conflicting with a big movement of people today who use Broad Street north-south, not just between neighborhoods, but also get to the on-ramp we have today on Broad Street. Now, one of the changes that you'd see under this lowered highway alternative is by moving the eastbound on-ramp over towards Bushnell Park West, that does change those travel patterns somewhat, and it does reduce the demand to go north-south along Broad Street. So it's really just then left at that neighborhood level traffic. So when we were looking at all these different options, and Nick and I actually have kind of a separate, far more detailed presentation, if you're interested after, we could walk you through. But one of the things we tried here is we went out and we counted cars. We tracked where they went through the area, and we kind of noticed how few were really taking that north-south connection, and that's what led us to try this. And the results, we were even a little surprised at how well it operated. It's almost remarkable how much better it operates than many of the other options on the table.
There would still be intersections there with pedestrian signalization so that bikes and peds could cross there efficiently, right?
Absolutely, and there'd be kind of full bicyclist pedestrian mobility at each of these 2 intersections, as well as like that green arrows trying to denote between them on the parcel of land between.
Tony?
And you've got with the extension in parallel to it in a couple places for neighborhood connections, it looks like in this concept.
You're talking about
the extension
of Garden Street.
Yep.
Yeah.
Garden Street extension.
Did you see my presentation? That's the next slide.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
To that point, and I'll, just to carry that through, so we'd heard a lot, starting kind of this summer and a couple other public forums, some complaints about Broad Street being cut off. We recognized the sensitivity there. And one of the things we wanted to bring to you today was with that addition that I just talked about, the extension of Garden Street, whether that additional route, that ability to get from Fraud Hollow off the bottom of the screen towards Capitol Avenue, up to Asylum Hill was something that could help mitigate that. So that was, you know, something we were interested in hearing, and it might take a minute to digest. So I can either pause here if there's any questions or anyone has any comments, or I can oh, here we go.
I just want to confirm one thing. You're saying that the green arrows represent bike and pedestrian connection, but not cars.
That's correct.
Just kind of curious, since you've taken a look at that, do you know approximately how much longer that would be than kind of what currently exists?
So it would depend slightly on where your origin on Capitol was and kind of where east-west you were going. But the distance between Broad and this road here is about 1,000 feet. So if you had to come down to this road and then back up, it'd be about 2,000 feet. That's about half a mile.
Okay. But then, of course, depending on how much faster it is.
Yeah, you know, we see it as probably being, you know, more efficient, these intersections operating more efficiently. Plus, if your destination was, you know, to the east, if you were over by the Bushnell or the Capitol, could actually be shorter than having to go all the way to Broad. Because remember, today there's no road here where this Bushnell Park West is shown.
Right. What about anybody headed west? Is there any other option other than Sigourney?
It would be Sigourney. It would be, or you know, you could take Broad Street up and then use Asylum Place around if you didn't want to go all the way over to that Bushnell Park West.
Okay. Thank you.
So you're saying that most of the cars that come down going east on Asylum and that would turn onto Broad Street, those are vehicles that are mainly going to get on the highway, is that?
So for the cars coming down Asylum and then turning right on Broad.
No, you're on Farm. That one,
Oh, sorry.
turning,
Yeah.
taking that right. They're going where generally?
I'm going to let Nick answer that over there.
Sure. In the PM peak, we have a lot of them getting onto I-84 eastbound on the Broad Street on-ramp. But throughout the day, we also have cars that are going down to Capitol. And it isn't, you know, it's not the major movement, but there's still a few hundred of them. But they do have several more options in this case. For example, they could take Asylum Place. Right here, just take a right and a left on Farmington and then still go down Broad. Or they could continue and take the new road, the Bushnell Park West or Road A. So they still have options, and it is a bit of a diversion from their normal route.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback. So I'm going to advance. So the next option, Tom's going to talk a little bit about sort of the origins and why we're looking at it.
So, thinking about the Trident area, you can't really think about it in exclusion to the rest of the network. And again, we're trying to think about ways in which we can enhance and create as much mobility as possible, create opportunities for kind of building out the network. And one of the things that we found very intriguing was, if we do really have an issue with those three intersections being so close together, is there a way that we might be able to realign the roadway network, create an extension of Farmington, bring it down to this new Bushnell Park West roadway corridor, and create something there that, again, solves our traffic considerations, but also begins to build in a network to the south. And so that's something that in a lot of ways is very compelling, because it kind of creates this featured development space right on Bushnell Park, one Farmington Avenue. Not necessarily, though, does it necessarily solve all the problems with the Trident. So I think the idea here is a really compelling one, but I think we still have to think about, are we achieving all the goals optimally with all the trade-offs? Are there other ways for us to build out this network that also make the Trident work very effectively? But we have been looking very seriously at some kind of way to consider kind of extending Farmington to the south. To do that, one of the key issues would be to slide the ramping system further to the south to allow for Farmington to come down and create the kind of block system that would work real well. And there's a lot of challenges associated with that from a traffic operations standpoint, from a queuing standpoint, and really I think we have to explore that some more as we think about some of these connections to see if that can even work. And then the third one that we have explored, and this was really in response to a lot of good input that we've received at prior sessions and through submissions, understanding that this is a great gateway, is there a way that you can change the way in which the roads come together in some kind of a roundabout? And I'll let kind of Casey explain the thought process here.
Thanks, Tom. So the question that came up earlier and Nick's response was a great one, and how modern roundabouts have started to be used, not just as a traffic operations measure, but a way to kind of be a gateway to a place. And there have been some studies done that indicate safety reductions in terms of when they're compared with signalized intersections. And they definitely are a potential speed control feature. You have to slow your vehicle down in order to traverse the roundabout. So we really did understand why people were asking, would a roundabout work at this series of intersections? When we looked at introducing what would be a single lane traditional modern roundabout, we looked at the volumes, and they're about double what the kind of maximum a single lane roundabout can hold. And so when we tested that, it really just didn't work. It created congestion and backlog kind of throughout the network. So we then looked, can we add some lanes and key locations to make it work? So we started doing that, and you're about to see the results, and it kind of looks a little bit like some sort of sea creature. It would be extremely complex. It's very hard probably for you looking at this top-down photo to understand how it would work and operate. And we could imagine as a driver approaching this that it would be extremely complex as well. It would be very tough as a pedestrian to try and cross these approaches. The size would impact, these are 4F park areas on either side of Broad Street that it would expand into. So, ultimately, we kind of just felt that this location is not the best location in the project area for a roundabout, but we are going to continue to investigate other intersections and see whether they could be kind of more appropriate locations for that.
Yeah, and this is kind of one of those fortunately things, because the idea of creating the roundabout there had a lot of really good qualities associated with it. And it engendered a lot of creative thinking, I think, on the part of the team. All right, so if this isn't working, what can we do? How can we try to kind of fix that issue? How can we try to make the system work? And we began to come up with this new concept, which I think is interesting and very compelling, to shift the intersection of Asylum and Farmington further west. And is there a possibility by shifting that west, and there's implications associated with it that we have to go through. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify. I said roundabouts create a safety reduction, which is in fact literally the opposite of what I meant to say, that they usually create crash reductions. So it's a good thing.
And Tom, just point out where the original intersection is on that and where the new intersection is, just so it's clear to everybody.
Yes. So my pointer's not as good as Casey, so he may do a better job. But the current Asylum Farmington intersection is where Casey's pointer is right now, and what we're trying to do is shift it as far west as kind of reasonably possible, and it does impact the DAS parking garage, but move it to separate it from what would then be the potential for a connection across Broad and Cogswell. We know that that's people see that as a very important connection. Can we create a scenario there where these two intersections work well? It's going to increase lane widths in this area, but it's something that's worth exploring, and it does open up, again, some possibilities for thinking about how that then impacts upon creating the network elsewhere. So this is something that was really brought about by the interchange that we had at the last session with all of you, and thinking, all right, if we know these are the goals, how can we begin to achieve those goals in maybe some other creative ways?
And one of the things too that was our inspiration for this was the concept a couple ago, the discontinuous Broad Street, and kind of seeing how well it worked when that kind of V shape was created separate from a north-south movement was kind of the inspiration. So what we've then done is kind of see how that played out. Done our preliminary traffic analysis. It does then push a lot of traffic once these two combine through this intersection with Broad Street, and that's where I have this bullet here: increase roadway widths. We'd see a pretty large cross section, potentially as many as 7 lanes across on this roadway segment here, which we understand from a bicyclist pedestrian standpoint is certainly not ideal. We would have a relatively significant amount of space using the current right-of-way for Farmington and then Asylum to potentially create some sort of pedestrian mall adjacent to that street that could try and mitigate for that significant roadway. The other thing we're looking at to try and potentially mitigate for that is there's a missing roadway just off the page here. Nick, I don't know if you can pan to that too. So basically, Sumner Street comes down and then does not extend all the way between Farmington and or to Farmington. So understanding that would bring property impacts into play, we have kind of looked at some scenarios to see whether that would help. And there's the potential that could help us reduce the width we need on this critical segment here, and potentially reduce that to 6 lanes instead of 7, which would be a step in the right direction.
Hey, Casey. Forgive me, I'm over here.
You're good.
Let me be the one to ask the stupid question, because it looks to me like maybe we're moving the Trident just to the west and we're going to have the same situation. Is that not the case, or why is this superior to where the current convergence of Farmington and Asylum come in today?
That's a good question, yeah. So the reason to look at it is because it allows for the provision of this north-south. It keeps Broad Street continuous in the way that it is today. The traffic operations would be a little bit worse. They wouldn't be at this point what we determined to be a fatal flaw according to the criteria we've set up, but they would operate a little bit worse. And then we'd be a little bit concerned about traffic queuing, just because there's so much traffic trying to move east, particularly during the afternoon peak period.
Worse conditions
Then our that discontinuous Broad Street option, which is the first one we showed you, it would be in all likelihood slightly better than today.
So just to put two things next to each other, this is the neighborhood of your multimodal station, and keep that in mind when you're saying 6 or 7 lane roadway. You're making a pitch or a proposal for a multimodal station at the same time as a 6 or 7 lane highway type road that nobody's going to want to put anything next to.
That's a very good point. Exactly. No, that's certainly, as we do that, kind of pros and cons, definitely under consideration.
What happens if you put a roundabout at that new 4-way intersection of Broad and Asylum?
I think Nick looked at that, and I think the roundabout itself would operate fine. The concern would be that traffic could queue back from this intersection into it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
She's actually saying roundabout here, not roundabout here, correct, Tony?
So that was Nick said the roundabout.
Yeah, unfortunately, Tony, the volumes are still very high at that intersection.
Too high for a roundabout.
Yeah.
There other questions on this concept?
So you have, if you move the intersection of Farmington and Asylum west, immediately west of that point of convergence is what, Flower Street and Asylum Place? What happens there?
So we would likely realign Flower coming in from the south to try and create a little bit more space. It's a surface parking lot right now, so we'd have to evaluate the impacts there. And we would likely close Asylum Place. Essentially the movement that Asylum Place creates would be, you continue along Asylum as it would now bend down to the south.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Jackie.
The option where you're extending Farmington Avenue was that one. What would happen to art space? Would you move around it, or?
I think under this scenario, the idea is that this site, this part of Hartford becomes an area that can be developed. And so I think you have an opportunity now for art space to be integrated in with other development opportunities in that area.
But the building would stay.
There's.
Thanks. On the western option, did you do any work on how much speeds on those arteries would go up?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, during the peak period, I don't think they would go up very much because of the congestion, but it's a really good question off-peak because with if you're driving along a 4 lanes going your direction section and there's not a lot of traffic on it, that would be a concern. We'd have to look at ways to try and mitigate that. I just want to point out one thing on this western shift. We did, Tom mentioned a little bit that it would impact this state DAS, Department of Administrative Services parking garage, and it's actually over 500 space garage that is subterranean. So you can see the top. When you drive past it, you think the top's just a surface parking lot, but it does extend several levels below ground. So as part of this option, we're kind of weighing, whether those impacts, whether we can mitigate them. And I know structurally, and we're still not sure this is going to work or not, but we're going to investigate the viability of whether the subterranean levels could be maintained if we can provide access to them. So that's something that we're in the process of looking at.
Queuing off of that one, my first question is related to a state parking garage. Do they pay for parking? Rhetorical question. But important. If you're talking about losing spaces, there's a very easy way to reduce the need. The design speed of the facilities in general, in looking at the state level policy for design speeds, it is based more around how highways work and not how city streets work. And a lot of our Hartford streets are getting designed for 30 and 35 miles per hour as the design speed in a walkable neighborhood that we want to put walkable development around. How are we doing it different on these streets, or are we continuing to design for 35-mile-an-hour streets?
Yeah, I hear Tim over there, and I think when we look at roadway curvature, we've been kind of looking at 30-mile-per-hour roadways. Now, when we have a straight segment, there's not a whole lot we can do in terms of curvature. And I'll let Tim.
Yeah, I think one of the issues is we've talked about how many cars are using these roads, are high volume roads, and most of them are multi-lane roads. So if you have really tight curvature and say narrow lanes, you have the ability for tractor trailers, whoever is using that facility, to track over into somebody else's lane. So we want to have a forgiving design. I know that does lead to speed, and maybe there's a way we can mitigate that. But we also have to provide a safe design so when there's 2 parallel cars, they can traverse the area safely.
As far as speed control, I think that's something that really, would take another day of discussion, and perhaps is something that we could have a session about in the future. There are plenty of opportunities for that, and of course some of them are done well and some of them have been done poorly. The main one that I've been focusing on is signal coordination, because the signals are going to be running throughout the day. If you have them set for 25 miles an hour, cars are either going to be going 25 miles per hour or close to it. So that's one option that we can use to maintain speed. But I really think that it's a pretty nuanced topic, and it's something that we could spend hours discussing in a good deal of detail.
And one more point to add to that is, we don't have it here on our graphics, but we're designing this multimodal network that includes bicycle facilities and wider sidewalks, and in locations where perhaps road geometry or speeds can't be brought down to a very human scale level. We're looking at potentially separated bike lanes or even cycle tracks, wider sidewalks, and better provisions for people who walk and bike. So there's other ways to potentially mitigate some of those faster roads, but your point is very well taken. Yes, Jackie.
That intersection, using that option, I would say that your problem's going to be at night, not normal traffic coming and going to work. It's going to be at night when the clubs let out. And you get a lot of speeding and up and down those intersections. During the day, there's just too much going on. Nobody's really moving that fast there. But at night, 1:30 in the morning, then you've got your problems. I don't know if you've ever tracked it then, but that's a very busy intersection at night.
No, that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah.
On the second option where you were talking about shifting Farmington Avenue, in earlier iterations of this idea, we had seen that road go right through where the YWCA is currently located. This looks like your intention is to go around it and leave the YWCA where it is. Am I understanding sort of your thought process at that corner now?
I was going to say, so yeah, we looked at it in two ways, and because some of your question comes back to whether Broad Street was maintained between them, and the reason we had showed it the way you saw it was in an effort to make these two intersections not fail. We were trying to generate some space. Ultimately, I think our conclusion has been that the small amount we can shift it to the south that would impact the Y doesn't actually solve the problem. There'd still be problems where cars would queue back and forth between these two intersections. So that's why we've come back now to just showing it staying to the north of the Y. And we could do it both with this segment of Broad Street maintained or without.
Okay, well, we've got 4 basic options with permutations of each of these options. And quite frankly, there's a lot of trade-offs. And we're still trying to understand what those trade-offs are. We aren't looking to necessarily choose a solution tonight. But we want to keep on working on these and truly understand the pros and cons of each. And so, we encourage your continued feedback. In fact, after this session, we have much more detailed drawings of these. If anybody wants to stay and really get into the weeds with us, we'd be more than happy to do that. But what I want to say is, just because we don't have this particular piece of it solved doesn't mean we should stop thinking about the broader implications of how to create better spaces in Hartford. And remember, this is just sort of sub-area 3 that we're looking at. There's many different ideas for sub-area 3, the Trident. I want to advance the slide and get into sub-area 4, because there's a real opportunity here to take a look at what we can do around this this interchange location, how to maybe activate the space a little bit better, recognizing that there's ramp structures that are going to come up at that point, and how to make better pedestrian streets, how to make more human scale environments, and quite frankly, how to tee up development opportunities for the city of Hartford. So that being said, I think the Trident in this particular area work hand in hand. I think there's some things that could potentially be advanced independent of whatever Trident concept moves forward. So Tom, you want to take us through that?
Sure, I'll walk you through it. I'll use my little pointer. This is Broad on the north. This is Farmington and Asylum. This is Asylum. This is that new road that is being incorporated into the design as the ramps come off. And then this is also a new road that's being brought in to connect in. And this is the current off ramps down to Capitol. And what's exciting about this area is that a fair amount of what's being built in this area is new. The new ramps, the new roads. So we have an opportunity here to design those roads in such a way as to make them really special. And one of the things we really want to take advantage of is this connectivity to Bushnell Park West. And so as we think about this neighborhood and we know that we're going to be bringing in ramps in this area, what can we do as part of that to really create this as a really great urban boulevard? And if you think about, the possibilities if CT Fast Track is coming in on the east side of the road versus the west, or the east side of the rails versus the west, is there an opportunity to incorporate that in? So we see Bushnell Park West, which has been named by others, by the community more so, as a real opportunity to create the beginning of a great space. But by itself, it's a little disconnected. This is a very large area, and we want to make sure that this area in the middle gets activated as well. And so the second part of our thought process is how can we bring the rampway into this neighborhood in such a way that maybe we can facilitate some additional interior roads, like with Garden, which is a local road. Can we create some more interior network roads to help activate this space, both for pedestrians to move through it, but also to set it up so that new development can happen in the area. We can create great open space. We can create connectivity from the communities to the south, to the north, in a lot of different aspects. And so looking at the different conditions that we've had with the Trident, we don't want to be beholden to any one condition as that continues to improve. What can we do in general in this area to make this area work very effectively under any of those scenarios? And so,
Tom, really quick, can you back up to that? The gentleman over here had a question. I just thought
Sure.
maybe it's worth sharing with everyone else. These are a little washed out, so it may be hard to see, but this alignment of I-84 is the proposed lowered alignment. That's not the existing. Remember, the existing highway comes down a little bit. So I just want to make sure that's clear again. We're looking at the proposed lowered alternative when you're talking about these new roads.
absolutely. So again, I'm going to hold this further away. I must be reverberating, I'm sorry. Looking at the original preferred option that you've seen before, even as we think about that option, and we've talked about the Trident in this configuration, is there an opportunity there to just extend a local road between Broad and Bushnell Park West? If we slide the ramps a little bit off to the left, can we, like with Garden, so not extending Farmington itself, and by extending Farmington, obviously you bring a fair amount of traffic into the mix and change kind of patterns. But here you're really, in this idea, maybe there's an additional road that can be brought in that serves to create connectivity. Again, this road, very similar to Garden, will be a pretty steep elevation to traverse the hillside. But there's opportunity there to, again, begin to build in a grid associated with this.
It strikes me that you're doing this backwards. Where the new intermodal transit center goes is going to dictate a lot of this.
I agree.
In my own view, that is exactly where it should go. Facing the park in a prominent, visible, high position, with the roadways around it serving transit functions or transit traffic, I guess. And some of the stuff you're talking about right there is just in the wrong place, or it just doesn't work. So why not solve that problem first? And then that affects all of these streets.
Yeah, Tony, view these as diagrams that illustrate the opportunity associated with activating this space. I think we completely agree with you that as we proceed forward, we now have to look at what we have in terms of the network possibilities and begin to integrate them into where's the best place for the station and how might they begin to work. But the first task we had was to see if there was some feasibility associated with increasing the network, so that as we begin to, in the next step, really identify the most optimal locations to site the station and to build development, can we now utilize that roadway network in such a way that it can foster that development to work?
From a network standpoint, I had the pleasure of cycling through the Aetna Road the other day, which has no signs telling you can't do that, but I'm sure the security guards would yell at me if I did it more than once. Is that a private road, and why isn't that part of our network for parallel systems here? I mean, that seems like an ideal parallel to Farmington.
I believe it is private.
So getting to the point that Tony made, what we're trying to show here are diagrams that illustrate the opportunity to build out the network. Because as we consider the different locations for transit centers, which is a part of the presentation we'll make today. And we figure out kind of the best, most optimal way to work through the Trident. We want to make sure that we don't do those, make those moves without thinking about what we can do in terms of the placement of the ramps and the placement of the roads.
You are aware is that was probably the old road to Hartford High.
Which one?
The old Hartford High. The new one that you're putting in.
This road, is it on the same alignment? It's good to know.
Just be aware of, yeah.
Okay.
You might name it the old Hartford, yeah, if you use it.
The second one was kind of to your point, the notion of, does it make more sense to maybe extend Farmington Avenue? There, I think if we extend Farmington Avenue, we have to, again, think about how we deal with the possible connection or lack of connection of Broad and Cogswell. But again, that is another way to kind of extend and connect the neighborhoods together. And again, looking at this, we recognize that, in fact, in this particular scheme, we're actually illustrating that by bringing Farmington Avenue down, we increase traffic, and we might actually have a situation where this cannot be a four-way intersection. And so these are a bit of a mix and match of schemes, but another thought would be maybe we can extend Farmington, and maybe that does work well, and that Farmington, Bushnell West create, again, now you've got some really great spaces on both sides of Asylum, trying again to make this Asylum core a very strong core, a very walkable place, but now creating three ways in which you can begin to connect the communities together. And then looking at the idea of the Trident West, is there a way that we can also create a larger network in this area as well, along with creating a lot more green space and open space and setting up this area where Asylum and Farmington come together, so this really stands as the gateway at the top of the hill, increasing the strength of Asylum as this main corridor, but now creating parallel corridors and beginning to think about how this area really begins to line up as another whole section of downtown that gets extended from in between the top of the hill and the downtown area, knitting the fabric of the community together. And that it's important to have these conversations, but it's also important to recognize that yes, this is just the roads, and you have to think about the open space in the neighborhoods as well. And that's probably a good segue to the next group.
Oh, great. Thanks, Tom. I don't want to cut conversation short on this because this is really fascinating, but we did build this as multimodal station area workshop. We do want to get to Gina, who has more information on the various station siting options, and we can talk a little bit more about how these network options relate to station placement, as Tony suggested. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, and we didn't really know what to lead with, but it made sense to start with the broader network and then work down to the station area. But as Tony suggested, yes, the station area placement has a lot to do with how we build out our network. So with that, I'm going to let Gina work through a series of slides. I'd like you to keep some of these questions in mind, though. We would like to start to get some of your feedback. Is anything we've shown you today, does it assist in the north-south connectivity of the city or the east-west? We'd definitely like to hear more from you about which of these things work from your perspective. With that, Gina.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to invite David Spillane from Goody Clancy and Bill Kenworthy from HOK, who's the city consultant, to come on up. We're going to kind of do a little joint presentation here. I'll be presenting the concepts, and they in turn will be presenting how the station's concepts could fit into the street network and the land use context and TOD development. So last meeting we did discuss how important it was that the station fits into the overall development of the site, how transit-oriented development, economic development opportunities are enhanced by the station locations. And so we talked pretty thoroughly about that. We reviewed the conceptual master plan options that the city's consultants were thinking about, and we previewed some station concepts. Today's objective really is to review the input that we've gotten to date. Because of that input, actually, we've taken the concepts we presented last time and refined them. Actually, out of the 5 we're going to be briefly showing you today, 2 of them were redesigned or relaid out based on the city's consultants' input, and another one was because of public input. And I'll purposely point to Bill and Tony because it was from them that we had gotten a new concept on the south side of Asylum. And then I'd really like to reduce the number of station site alternatives that we're going to be bringing forth. Hopefully we can start doing that today. We've handed out a layout of all of the 5 concepts that we're still talking about. We'd like your input on. We're also handed out the evaluation criteria that I would like to discuss. So as we're going through the concepts, please feel free to review the evaluation criteria that I will be going through and jot down some notes. You can start ranking them either during the presentation or afterwards, or just have them as points of discussion as we move through. So this isn't really an eye chart. This is just the 6 concepts that we showed before, or the 7 concepts. 6 on the north side of Asylum and 1 on the south side. And for those who are new to the project, or just as a refresher, the station site that we're looking at really would be bounded on the west by Cogswell, on the east by Union Station, and then Asylum is bisecting the site. So it's about a 20-acre site that we're looking at to locate the multimodal station. We've refined these concepts that we presented last time, as I said. Some of them had a split rail and bus station. Others have just been refined to a different type of a layout to enhance TOD. And as I said, we did get another layout for the south side of Asylum that we're going to be looking at. I also want to bring to your attention and remind you that we're also talking about a phased approach to the development of the station in most cases. Because of how the overall project is being staged, the tracks are going to be located first. So the tracks that are currently serving Union Station will be moved approximately 2,000 feet to the west. Because of that, they will be built first and the rail station then will be built. The highway itself is going to be depressed, and that might not be built for several years later, 3, 4, 5, 7 years. That's still to be determined, so therefore any of the concepts that require an overbuild over the depressed highway will have to follow later. So you're going to be building your rail station first, and then for the concepts where you have the overbuild on a cap, you'll be building that a few years later. So you'd have to have a temporary solution for how your buses and possibly your parking is laid out.
So Gina, if I could just clarify, what we're talking about here is 6 options on the north, 1 on the south, and we've sort of revised and simplified to 3 on the north and 2 on the south, right?
Correct.
And that's what we'll be presenting this afternoon?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Were there any other questions about what Gina just said? There was a lot of technical content in that.
What's the delay, the 3, 5, 6, 7 year delay
Well, and I think
in completing the roadway?
Dave or Rich, or would you like to explain that maybe in a little more detail, or the phasing of or Casey? Okay.
Just go back. Forward. So I guess how I would explain that as, like Gina said, the first thing that would need to be done in order to construct the lowered highway is to relocate the railroad. So you're looking at kind of a zoomed in map again. Here's Cogswell Street, Broad Street, down here, Farmington. So this red is the line of the relocated railroad. So that would get built first. So before we can even start lowering the highway, even via any sort of temporary roadways, that would be the first thing that would happen. Now, in conjunction with that, the new rail service would have to start working. So before we kind of shifted everything over from Union Station, everything would have to be in place with the new railroad and a new rail station, whether that's the full rail station, or in some of these concepts that might be just a partial, just enough to keep operations going while the full highway is constructed. So then the second stage and on from there would involve the construction of the lowered highway. So today, the existing elevated highway comes through in this area. Much of this section of the lowered highway is being constructed what we say offline, so it's not in the same location as the existing highway. So some of this, for example, this concept we're on, which I've jumped ahead to, could likely be built all at once right before the highway is even open. You could build a building over the highway if you needed to. This area to the south is much more complicated because this is where we're actually, the proposed lowered highway and the existing highway are in and about the same location. So the area down here, so any station concepts that are south of Asylum, the staging is a lot more complex because everything's kind of all in one position that we need to kind of manage construction of, and we want to make sure that that rail station is constructed in a place that it can operate right from day one.
All right, thank you, Casey. So going back to the slide prior, the evaluation criteria that we feel is really critical is concentrating on the station design, the operational efficiency, how it fits with the site, whether it supports economic development, and the walkability of the site. And I don't know if either David or Bill want to just describe that a little bit better on how a station should fit into the overall concept of the street network. Sure. Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a lot to amplify the core principles have been articulated here because I think that we're hitting all the main points. But the real goal is that a transit hub should be part of the civic fabric of the city. It should have a civic presence. Most of the major rail and transit hubs in the world, if not the nation, always have a really great civic public space nearby as a part of that ensemble. So it's really important to make sure that as you create the transit center, that it has that relationship to the city as a front door and a gateway in and of itself, and also has a key public space around it that allows you to celebrate that facility within the city fabric as a civic building.
Thank you. So as we look at the evaluation criteria, we have a couple points under each one that we want you to kind of think about as we're going through each of the concepts. For the station design, and we created these based on what we've heard from the public. The station should be a visible civic asset. We've heard that a lot. It should also minimize safety and security concerns. So we want to make sure that where we build it and where we locate it, that it minimizes any issues with security in the future. And this also has something to do with whether you build it over a depressed highway or not. We're still in discussions with Office of Homeland Security, the FRA, the FTA to identify whether or not there would be any issues with that. In terms of operational efficiency, you want to make sure that you're transferring between the rail and the bus modes, that it's convenient, it's easy to transfer, that it's more of a multimodal type station footprint. You want to make sure that your buses are pulling into your site into an efficient manner. They're not circuitous, they're not going around the block several times before they can get into the station site. That's really important. In terms of site sensitivity, you want to have it integrated into existing and future land uses. You want to make sure that the site plan supports economic development, that you're leaving enough land around the station and the bus area so that good economic development can be built there in the future. And walkability, we've heard that a lot. Walkability, bikeability into the site, within the site is a very critical, very important. So our first concept, and we've laid this out in kind of simplified graphics, just to show you the purple that is right there in each of the site concepts, that represents, the station. The orange is what we're considering a kiss and ride, a park and ride drop-off location, basically a drop-off location. The blue is the bus facility. And that bus facility, it would be both the intercity buses, which are Greyhound and Peter Pan, as well as the local buses that CT Transit operates, and possibly some employer shuttles. And in this scenario, we're also suggesting that there be a plaza along Asylum, so in front of the station. Now, whether that plaza is really an appropriate size, we don't know at this point, but maybe that would be a nice way to integrate the station into Asylum. In this scenario, we're also suggesting that there be a separate but proximate bus station. And this layout was laid out with the assistance of the city's consultant as a way to maximize TOD development on the north side of Asylum. This bus facility can move around. It could possibly be put over a cap on the north of Garden Street, just like the station to the south of Garden Street is going to be located on a cap, and that cap again is over the depressed highway. Would you like to enhance that conversation?
Well, I think if we go back to the criteria we looked at before, one of the things that's important to say about this one is that the rail and bus facilities are separate from each other. Okay, that should work. Working better? That is working better. One of the things to note about this one is that, in fact, the rail and bus locations are different. You would have to cross the street. And I think part of that is about transfers from bus to rail. And I think we could have a conversation about how many people are transferring from rail to regional bus services. So that would be one factor. But the other thing I think in terms of a unified station that serves bus and rail is that people are going to transit, going through one door into one space, and it doesn't matter whether you're getting a bus or rail. And so you don't have two subways, two Dunkin' Donuts, two locations. It ultimately becomes a far more efficient. Now, ultimately, this may be counterbalanced by other factors we're looking at here, but I think it's not perfect to have these two in different locations. I think, as Gina said, we've always talked about the visibility of the station on Asylum. That seems important. If you had a plaza here or something that set it up, I think, as you said, question would be, how big should that be? I think this one looks like it's about 100 feet. That, in my mind, might be pushing it a little bit too far, back from the street. So we'd lose the connection to the street and the iconic sense. From a transit-oriented development perspective, what I think we're trying to do in general is maximize the amount of space we have available for transit-oriented development. And I think about transit-oriented development as being pretty simple. It's just about creating great spaces around transit. And that's not just good in terms of economic development. It creates a better station because there are people around the station, there are amenities around the station. It creates the station itself as a more attractive space. So in this alternative, where we have the station over the highway, we're actually using land that probably isn't optimally suitable for development. So building over the highway does free up other land, which we wouldn't have if the station was located on that. As Gina said, we may not be able to do that. There may be security and other kinds of considerations that lead us in a different direction.
And I also neglected to mention that actually what you're looking at is the street level view. There actually would be a level of the station below grade, so that the tracks and the platform are below grade. They're going to be at the same grade as the highway. You could also have a concourse, so you would be coming in and off the train at the below grade to come up to the street level, but you could have a concourse in between that allows you to have the rail and the bus connection under Garden Street also, so that is another idea. So as you're looking at these station concepts, just keep in mind that this is really just the street level we're showing you, and that there would be a below grade. And also on top of this, we're also suggesting a structured parking lot that would be above the bus facility in almost every single one of these concepts.
If I could just add
right there.
Real quick.
Sure.
And just to reinforce where David was going with this, Asylum as a connector from downtown up the hill is really important. And by building the transit center over that gap again is really important to keep the continuity and to be able to bookend that with development on either side as part of that scheme. I think it's one of the strong points here.
Does anybody have any questions on this concept?
Well, it seems to me, no matter what choice that you use, that to me, the number one thing is to have support economic development. Because if whatever we build doesn't facilitate further development, it's a waste of time and money. That space is dead space already. So to me, the most important thing is what design best will facilitate new economic development, and go from there. The city can't afford, it just can't afford to have something that doesn't support economic development.
Okay, thank you.
I think you said that one of the problems of building the station over the highway is that the highway is going to be built after the station. And so that's a problem in several of these alternatives. Is it possible to build a temporary station that's not on the highway, and then after the highway is finished, build a permanent station in a better location on top of it?
We actually have drawings that are a phased approach, and you're welcome to come up afterwards and look at our drawings, but that is exactly what would have to happen, yes. Right. So this is kind of the ultimate build-out you're seeing here. This is what would happen once everything was relocated and built, but you would have to have a phased approach, and we do have the different levels and phases in our drawings. Okay. So here's a variation on the north side alternative. In this case, the rail and bus facility would be combined, where the station, again in the purple, the rail station, and the bus facility is along Garden Street, so we're calling this the Garden Street access. You'd have drop-offs on the north side of that. Pedestrian access and the station would front Asylum Street. This again requires a significant overbuild and a phased construction. Maybe not as supportive, possibly, or takes up more room, I should say, for TOD. Would you like to?
One of the benefits of this scheme is that it frees up the parcel where you were looking at the previous scheme that had the bus station on the east side on Spruce, to allow for more of a coherent development to occur with the Union Station over time. So you get the bus footprint off of Spruce Street and allow that to become more of an address connecting into the existing Union Station complex. I would almost also like to see a variation of this that turns the bus station north-south, sitting over the highway, so it frees up these flanking developments even more and give more capacity adjacent to the train station, related to the overbuild issue and filling in the gap. But this was one that definitely tries to get more synergy and compactness between the two station components, to make them as focused on one area as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add with this one, it does, I mean, as Bill just said, it overcomes some of the issues we had with the other one. We get bus and rail combined, and they wouldn't need to be literally in that configuration. We get clear pedestrian access on Asylum, the ability to deal with vehicles on Garden, the two are in the same place, and because the bus facility is taken off a site that otherwise could be used for transit-oriented development, we have a little more space for transit-oriented development. So there are a lot of good things going with this one.
Gina, maybe you covered this and I didn't hear it, but I just wanted for everyone else's benefit. What are those other two pink squares south of Farmington?
Yes, thank you. That would be the access off the platform. So that's below grade access, and then coming up to the street level, it would be escalators or elevators. Or stairs to come up to the street level, and that just represents that you're having two egress points along the platform area.
So that little pink box. So the little pink
that
box that's south of Asylum is
right
going to have an underground walkway to the station. That's a separate egress.
There could be, right, Jim, if you want to.
Yeah, there'll be a concourse at the level below Asylum. There will be a pedestrian concourse to connect the station to the vertical egress points. And those are diagrammatic egress points at the ends of the platform. Those basically mark the ends of the platform. But you would, yeah, it is.
Yes.
That's what Amtrak says we need, you know.
Okay, any other questions? All right, so we developed a concept that requires no overbuild. And basically what that means, in order to construct a station that does not require a cap, does not require overbuilding over the highway or the tracks, we're suggesting that you could place a station just to the west of the tracks. That would be rail station with some drop-off. The drop-off would have to be connected, it is connected, if you can see that, to Garden Street. So their access for drop-offs would be off of Cogswell to Garden or Spruce to Garden. And then the bus facility could be laid out either on top of the cap north of Garden, like we were just discussing, or in this location with TOD integrated into it, as well as the structured parking. But this would allow for construction of both facilities without phasing and without any risk in waiting for, you know, the tracks or the highway to be built before you could build the bus facility.
And I see that strikes me as a less than ideal distance between the two facilities. Is that true?
It doesn't have the multimodal feel or multimodal approach, correct. If you moved the bus a little bit closer, that could be helpful, but there would be some issues with separating those uses, I would think, from our objective.
In this particular alternative, if the station were built in that location, doesn't it then free up the space south of Asylum over the ramps for new development, for the new TOD, which is likely to be relatively tall, right? So that this iconic station couldn't be seen from many places. I mean, that's one of the problems with any of the locations on the north side of Asylum, is that the station is likely to be hemmed in by new development and tall buildings, and it can't very well be an iconic building if you can't see it, which is one of the principal reasons that I favor a location on the south side of Asylum where it can address the park. And maybe there'd be some new development there, but not a lot, and it would be visible all the way across the park.
Okay, thank you, and we're getting there. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was, relative to the north side, of course, if you could get a station location with the Farmington alignment and the Asylum quarter from downtown, nosing out at an intersection, I think I presented at the last public meeting in August, you could certainly get that viewpoint up and down from the east and the west. But if the station was on the north, there are ways to create diagonal view sheds and create civic spaces next to that station that you could begin to open it up so it wasn't, completely encapsulated by that development. Certainly, we're looking at an eight-story plus or minus development around here in terms of the base zoning that would occur. And the station's probably going to be much lower than that. But the design of the station, the design of the open spaces begin to set that up. I'm even thinking, Asylum Avenue coming up from downtown, especially because of the uphill walk you're taking, wants to have a lot of great streetscape amenities. It wants to be a wider sidewalk. It wants to have a double row of trees and lots of benches and even some terracing maybe to mitigate that slope a little bit for pedestrians. So I think that next layer of design is the thing that begins to address some of those issues. But certainly there's the visibility that we would have to design into it for any station location that we're going to look at.
I would just agree with Bill. I mean, I think with a station on Asylum, with the right design and the right development of the streetscape and infrastructure around it, we can create a very iconic place that people go past, every day on their way in and out of town. The pluses of this one are clearly that by developing the bus facility and the station off the right-of-way, that we get over all the phasing issues. But the price we pay for that is we're using two excellent potential development sites to accommodate bus and train facilities. So if you look at North of Asylum, we've essentially got 4 sites there. It's largely reduced to 2 by this location, but we do have the benefit of phasing. And unlike the 2 we looked at before, we don't have any of those questions which we haven't yet been able to answer about, well, whether we will ultimately be allowed to construct a station and a bus facility on air rights over a highway or rail, rail corridor. So if there were fatal flaws with either of those previous 2, there's certainly benefits to this.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll turn our attention to the south side of Asylum.
Gina, before you do that, let me just make clear, somebody pointed out that the order of these in your visual sheet are slightly different than the order in the criteria sheet. Just be aware that the Asylum Plaza is first, then the no overbuild, which is second, is actually third in your evaluation criteria. So if you're actually filling these out, just be aware of that. I'm sure you all caught that. But
Thank you. So south of Asylum concept, this is the concept that was introduced after our last meeting. Capitol View Transitway, we're calling it. The rail facility faces Farmington Avenue. Again, it's in the purple. You have the bus facilities oriented to this transitway concept so that you have this Capitol View corridor. This would require an overbuild and a phased construction. It does allow access better to CT Fast Track that would be coming in on the south side. Road B, a new road coming up to up through Road A, and then you would have access on and off of Broad Street. Do you have any comments on?
So I think this one, like the alternatives we looked at on the north, one of its benefits is that, again, it's largely both station and bus are connected. They are largely located over the existing highway right-of-way, and therefore most of the better parcels suited for transit-oriented development, economic development, are really remain sort of free for that. For that purpose. One of the things that is important to say about this one is that in the previous presentation, I think what we learned is that almost all of the complexity and the moving parts are on this block between Broad and Asylum, Bushnell Park West, and Road B. So some versions of this alternative become far more difficult with some of the concepts with the extension of Farmington. So there's a great degree of interconnectivity between which options we ultimately landed on for street infrastructure purposes and how a concept would work in this location. Doesn't mean they couldn't be overcome, but we haven't done the 6 variations of this concept with the 6 different street network infrastructure pieces here. We would ultimately need to do that if this is one of the ones we were carrying forward for further study.
I think one of the powerful ideas in this concept is this notion of the diagonal open space that could pass from Asylum Hill down into the park in some orientation. I think I'm concerned about the nature of the uses along that open space in this scheme, given what that'll do to create, whether it'll create a city street or whether it'll create a service drive, given the nature of the traffic and the frontages there. But I think that really powerful idea of connecting the hill to the park and the State House in some way and through and having a passage down to Capitol, that kind of movement, I think, is an important idea that should be, tested a little bit further in any scheme that we look at. Going to your point about the visibility of the station.
Could I just add one more point on this, Bill? And I'll make the same point on the next one, and that's really about the character of Broad Street, because I think we've had a tremendous amount of focus on the quality of Asylum Street. But as we go through this process, I think we should be careful not to forget Broad. Broad is clearly a terrible street today. It could be so much better in the future in terms of pedestrian and bike street. And I think just because it's not good today, we should be thinking about it in the future. And one of the concerns I have on this one, which is probably even more on the second one, is just how much of that bus infrastructure ends up on Broad. So we've probably got 500 feet of Broad Street where we're really looking at access to bus operations along that street. Not again to say that couldn't be mitigated, but I think it's an important consideration that any of these alternatives, that just as we look for significant improvements in Asylum, we really keep focusing on the quality of Broad as an important pedestrian connection between neighborhoods.
We have a question over here.
Yeah, I actually have a question about regarding pedestrians. This one only has the one bigger pink block for egress. Are those two other little ones by the CT Fast Track on the right?
Those are those station. That's a CT Fast Track station.
So they're not egress points. So this one only has the one.
Oh.
There could be another one up. There could be another one up here.
Okay, thank you.
The question was, why is it such a strangely shaped station?
Jim.
That's a very good question.
The next
I
one's strange,
agree
too.
with you completely. We're really having difficulty nailing down the actual program of this building. We're getting a lot of different numbers from some of the entities that will be in the building. And so the size of that, I think, is probably larger than it really needs to be. And one of the benefits I was going to say about this one also is this almost could work as a single phased one. I think the entire station could probably be here, and we wouldn't need to build over the highway at all. I also think that you could end up with a very interesting elevation that ends this piece if you're on one side of the road. This diagonal also happens to link the dome and the dome, and I think could be a very and also, the smaller piece here. This could be a very interesting public space, I think, with at the end of this street, with a very interesting elevation of the station here, and the vistas up and down.
And I think the curvature they were trying to reflect the bus bus
the curve
layout.
on this side,
Yeah.
just trying to reflect the access to buses.
To the buses is why it kind of looks a little funky, kind of a round entryway.
Oh, Mike's got a question.
I just want to make sure I understand too. So you think as these designs evolve, it will probably become a smaller footprint so that the iconic nature of this building may be more diminished, I guess, by its presence. And if I'm in the park, if I understand the elevation and the viewing angles on this, what I'll mostly be seeing is a big bus station. Is that roughly what I would visually be looking at?
No, I think the bus functions are off to the side of this boulevard.
Yeah, I'm just envisioning, I'm down in the lower right-hand corner looking up, and it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, the bus stations are oriented towards Capitol Avenue on the angle, so they're between the train station and the park.
Correct.
So
What would the grades be, though? Would the grades be depressed? Yeah. Lower?
The hope would be that there'd be some sort of large development, transit-oriented development here that would, so the
So
view
you-
would be up the boulevard and not of this function. The hope would be that there would be a development here that would block any views into the internal parts of the block.
And the station would be higher.
Yeah.
Elevated higher up.
Right.
So then the view from the park would be resting on the hope that we would have transit-oriented development to shield us from viewing primarily a bus station. I think the train station is a great opportunity for iconic and a beautiful design. I've yet to see bus stations that have achieved that objective, but I leave that to your challenge.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead. Did you have something to add or not? Oh.
So the question is, should we be thinking of any of these designs as being more or less economical?
I look at the no overbuild and it looks like the cheap out proposal. Is it?
I would think that would be the case, yes.
I think the
I mean,
thing
we've
that
not costed these out, we're not there yet, but I think anything that requires the overbuild would be more costly than the options that don't require the overbuild.
But I would also add to that that there's more economic return depending on who owns the land if you're developing instead of building transit centers on the dirt. So it's easier to build on dirt no matter what you're building, but the opportunity to build with public projects on top of the overbuilds are going to be, they all actually could happen as opposed to private development over the highway because of the nature of having to phase and construct and design that in a way that's integrated. I mean, take Heaven on top of I-84, for instance, that office project that was never built that ended up being a skate park. You need public projects to be able to execute on top of those overbuilds for the most part, if they're ever going to happen.
And the other question clearly is how much overbuild you have. I mean, there are lots of examples of very compact train station footprints, essentially waiting area and concession areas, not a lot of overbuild space. If you contrast that with the level of overbuild required to accommodate a full bus station, bus bays, parking, other pieces. So, more overbuild is likely to add more cost. Less overbuild, less cost. There are some functions that could work quite well in a compact overbuild. There are other ones that just require a lot of space and would add a lot of cost.
Hi. What might be just a minor point, when you get a building with a big curve, isn't that a lot more expensive and complicated and also kind of wasted space because normally you get square rooms and so forth as opposed to curvy
More
things
decorative.
with pointy little nooks that don't do anything?
That would be the architect's answer.
Yeah, these are very diagrammatic, so we're not anywhere near.
Yeah, and actually, right. And actually our exercise for this phase of the project is really just to site the station and identify a location for the station. It's not to do any building design, but that's something to long-term consideration. No, right. But then is that going to be iconic or, but that's the other part of that, so.
Let me just add, to go back to the point I made earlier, which is that if we were to develop one of the concepts that extended Farmington, that would essentially be coming through like that. So we would have to modify this concept to address that. Then some of the other options that Tom talked about earlier, we had a connector street from Broad, again, coming over to Bushnell, Park West. So again, there'd be modifications of this to accommodate that. Those could probably be done, but that is one of the levels of complexity about this side where we've got more moving pieces than we have in other parts of the project.
And just a general comment on any time we show structured parking, it should have a transit-oriented development frontage. And we've got way too many parking garages that just kill blocks in Hartford. So we can put them behind the development and have an actual streetscape.
I think that is the objective of all of us, correct? All right, should we go to our last south of asylum concept? This actually was developed with the benefit of the city's consultant, where we lay it out a little bit differently to maximize the potential for TOD and also this roadway network in this area. So we do have the rail facility again at the top, kind of an odd-shaped parcel again, but we could, that's just to represent the space requirements. We do have the bus facility to the south of it in a horizontal north-south direction where access again would be off of Broad Street. And I'm not sure if you want to add to that.
Sure, and some of we were trying to, again, get an opportunity that was over the rail, not over the highway with us on dirt, or at least over the rail platform, not depending on development of the train station over the highway. And then trying to locate the bus facility as close as possible to the train station. There's some challenges to that in terms of the frontage on Broad and trying to make it a great street, as David's referring to, as well as orienting some less than mixed-use type developments towards Frogs Hollow. So, but it did free up most opportunity for the great addresses of frontages on Asylum and on the park. So it's one thing to discuss about what the opportunities as well as what the challenges are with this particular scheme relative to the others.
And we could have a bigger setback along Broad too to allow for more TOD development if that's necessary also. So.
Yeah, I do have some concerns about Broad here. In the Farmington down to Road B is probably a 3-minute walk. Just to have station and bus station along that, probably isn't going to give you the most pleasant, walking environment along there. The other, consideration to me a little bit on this one would just be where the bus station, if I were to think of folks who were, downtown walking to the bus station or coming from the bus station walking to downtown. It's a longer walk, and it's a walk that's, until development builds in, is fairly separated. It's not quite as central as the other options.
When you're looking at some of these options that are south of Farmington and along Broad, how are you proposing to manage sort of the chaos of the on the other side of the street? There's an entrance to an Aetna parking garage. There's, as well as the YW parking space. I think there's 3 streets, right in a row there. And I think it could be really confusing or challenging if we've got a whole lot of traffic going in and out on the other side as well.
So in this area is where you're talking about.
Yeah.
That would be more of a Nick question. Oh, but I don't know if Nick, if you want to respond to any of that for the traffic aspects, or.
One thing to keep in mind is Broad Street will be a much less busy street than it is today if we do cut out that section between Farmington and Asylum. And even if we don't, it doesn't have that on-ramp on there anymore, so it cuts down on the traffic volume. Of course, having closely spaced driveways is always a concern. It's something that we don't really do these days when we're building new roads. We try to keep driveways consolidated as much as possible. And this could be an opportunity, for example, if we're having if we're having a major driveway for the train station or bus station, to put a traffic signal there and consolidate those driveways with it. So there are different options, but essentially what we call access management is the main principle behind it.
Any other questions on this concept or comments? So we have 10 more minutes. Mike?
No,
I was
you
just
did
gonna
really
say, do
well
you
with,
wanna-
with the time.
Should we conclude with some questions or discussion?
Well, I just want to preface that I think these are some good questions to start. But I also, it gets even more complicated when you think about the station siting relative to all of the network options that you saw previously. So for those of you who've been really paying attention and you want to try to connect those things, that would be very helpful too. I mean, if you see any particular road option or, that enhances a station location or vice versa, let us know that as well. But Gina, I'll let you ask that first question.
Well, I think this gentleman had a question first.
I had one. I was on a couple of these. There's bus, at least conceptually, bus pullouts on the steep segment of Asylum, and from just a user's standpoint, that seems kind of sketchy. If you think of the elevation.
At Spruce and Asylum? Or which
nope.
one? Which concept are you talking about?
Concept 3, and then the 2 south of Asylum ones. There's 3, and then south of Asylum number 1. So that one, yeah.
That one. So you're suggesting the buses are being pulled out. I'm sorry, where? That's just a pull off for the local, the CT local.
So boarding
buses?
and disembarking for anyone using a bus that has mobility issues or is wheelchair bound on the steepest segment that we have in Hartford would be really problematic.
Those can be relocated then. I mean, that was just to represent that you'd want to have your local buses that are currently going down Asylum that don't need to pull into the station, that there needs to still be continuous stops along that area. But that's a good point. Thank you. So does anybody have any?
Well, Sandy way in the back.
Yeah, okay, Sandy.
I just wanted to raise one issue that something that's not really been addressed very much in the multimodal stations is where is the CT fast track. And I think that's going to be very key for having a well-functioning intermodal station. So I think that I just want to toss out that in my mind, it leaves things as an open question as to exactly how you site a station if we don't know exactly what's happening to CT Fast Track, because it's so important to have a good connection with CT Fast Track and the rail system.
Right, and the CT Fast Track alternatives are still being studied. For the two south concepts, we're showing that the CT Fast Track would serve the station coming in on the new road, Road B, and going up on Road A. On the north side concepts, we're suggesting that CT Fast Track operate like it does now along Asylum once it leaves the dedicated right-of-way. So both the north side and the south side of Asylum would accommodate CT Fast Track, just in different manners. But that's a good point, Sandy, so thank you. So does anybody have, we've heard some pros and cons on each of these station concepts. Does anybody have a preference on, and a lot of the layouts can be mixed and matched, instead of laying it out east-west, we could possibly lay it out north-south for the bus bays. Just overall feelings, north side, south side of Asylum. Any particular layout you like better than other layouts and why? Any general discussions, overall access issues that you're concerned about for one concept over another?
Whoops. Well, I have a very strong preference for the south side of Asylum. Possibly 2 Broad Street Station would be the best one. I favor it being on that grassy corner at the current intersection of Broad and Farmington, which is the former location of Hartford Public High School. And being high, overlooks the park and would make the station very visible.
Real quick question: is there any station concept and network concept that synergistically work together the best? I wasn't supposed to ask that question.
Do we see they're all evolving. We're evolving together, obviously, right? We don't have the roadway network totally figured out on the south side. We could work with a concept similar to that, so it allows the integration of that roadway network. I think this is an iterative process, and that's really what we've been doing since the last 3 months that we met, and we'll continue to do that. Yes. I don't think there's any one answer, though, at this time.
I was just going to comment that, contrary to Tony, I prefer north of Asylum, but more importantly, as close to downtown as possible for the location. So I like the Garden Street access one for that, and it leaves so much more. It may be more expensive because it's got the overbuild. It leaves so much more property available for development. And it's kind of
in terms of a layout, are you looking at this type of, you like this Garden Street versus the Asylum Plaza type layout?
Yeah, to get the 2 stations as close together as possible. I think that's going to make it more convenient for everybody. Mm-hmm. And again, get it as close to downtown, because I think that's where you're going to be getting the greatest flow of people.
Now, if we move the bus facility to north of Garden, and would that achieve the same goals that you're thinking of, or?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. I think one of your colleagues showed that we could flip is it the bus station that's further north? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right. You're interested, obviously, in one station, one multimodal station proximate to the rail and the bus are proximate to each other and making a connection, east-west connection.
Can it be a single building?
Well, in this the blue is only representing the bus bays, so the purple is representing a joint rail and bus waiting room. Yes, so it is one building.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I think, Bill, you had one?
Yes. The Farmington Avenue extension, why can't it run through, on the Capitol View Transitway, run through the orange area down there?
Right
almost
there.
on, yeah. So actually,
it'd come off of this way and go straight down this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It absolutely can. Again, it gets into the challenges of the experience of that street and what we're fronting on it at the end of the day with the bus uses versus what mixed-use development might do to a street like that. But it can. My concern is these highway ramps, wherever we locate them, I think they're a deterrent for anybody coming and walking from the park or Road A down towards the south. It's a challenge to cross on that side of the street because of the nature of those ramps. If you look at how any highway ramps interface with urban environments, it's not the most pleasant place when you're looking at 3 and 5 lanes to have to cross at any time. So the hope was to try to get an urban street to the north and push the ramps to the south, but we were absolutely looking at that, the feasibility of that kind of switching of the two.
And the other one, Bill, and that I go back to the traffic questions, which somebody might weigh on, because in this alternative, we've gone to all these steps to get a T-shaped intersection of Broad and Farmington. And I think if we were to reintroduce a fourth one into that, I don't know if anybody can speak to whether that would function or not at this point if we were to add that connection in there. We're just trying to make that intersection as simple as possible, and so that would be a question probably we could only answer another day.
Jim? Just on my experience with centers of this type, it's critical that the parking be as close as it can be to the station. And I think in this particular alternative that you see, that might not be able to be done.
This is, in this
Yeah.
schematic, the parking
Yeah, in
is
other words,
located
you don't.
right.
In other words, you're going to get commuters to some extent, and business people who will be taking the trip into the city or to the south or over to Boston on the new rail service, and they're not going to walk that distance or want to walk that distance to the rail station.
I mean, there's a possibility you could incorporate the parking somewhere to the south, maybe as part of a TOD development down here, or, but yeah, that's a good point.
West of the highway.
Or west
West,
of,
or over the highway, west, yeah, just a little bit west to where it is now.
like,
No, north of Asylum, on Garden, but over the tracks.
for the parking structure?
Yep, yeah.
I think that's what Jim is,
Yeah,
well,
south of Garden.
oh, so like here.
Yeah, right around there.
That would be more proximate.
Tony? I'm going to say exactly the opposite thing from Jim. And I'd ask the experts in the room how transit multimodal stations are built in dense urban environments with transit-oriented development that is successful. Is the parking put right next to the destination, or is it sometimes put a little further away so that the folks with the wallets have to walk past the things that take their money?
Well, go ahead, Bill, you can answer that.
I would answer that given the nature of the disruptive technologies that are coming down the road very soon, and having spent just last week at a conference in LA at ULI talking about how autonomous vehicles are going to transform the way we look at parking structures and the location of parking, how much capacity is needed both for surface lots and adaptive needs of parking structures in the future that may no longer be required as parking structures, that there's not a lot of clear answers right now. Certainly, I can point to 10 or 12 different transit stations in the country that have parking right next to them. But as that technology evolves, we may not want to build on our prime real estate big parking structures, or if we build them, we want to make them adapt to other uses over time. So I think it's something that we need to be really careful about in terms of real estate and proper location within a city related to the long-term resiliency of that city to have potentially unused parking structures in the heart of downtown. But it's just the beginning of this disruption that's just starting to occur. As this project evolves and we develop over time, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we'll have more certain answers. But I think we need to be able to design and think about flexible, adaptive solutions today that allow us to be successful today, as well as allow us to evolve in the future.
I just wanted to add that in developing transit-oriented development, often there is an opportunity that the most valuable property for redevelopment is often publicly owned because of the nature of kind of creating the space to create the station. And traditionally, that would become a station with surface parking adjacent to it, and that would really be anti-TOD. And so there is an opportunity to integrate parking very effectively into this design, maybe with again, you want proximate, but you don't want necessarily on top. And so I think there is a balance that you can achieve there, where you do want people to engage with the public space, whether it's the public space directly adjacent to the station or the street space, so that that it activates the corridor. You really want people to be out on the street as much as possible. And I think we have to think about that when we start thinking about these permutations.
But we are anticipating the need for parking primarily for your Amtrak riders, some of your intercity bus riders, your riders that are really going to be coming to the station and traveling longer distances than your regional rail riders, for example. We would hope they would come in on by bus and be distributed throughout the city by bus. So we are incorporating a footprint of about 500 to 600 parking stalls that would be structured in these concepts.
I want to say that we're like 5 minutes after the hour. We're here when we're not leaving. So if you want to come and speak with us informally, we're more than happy to do so. But Jackie, why don't I give you the final question?
Birthday lucky. It seems to me that number 3 Garden Street makes the most sense because it's an access point for the traffic more away from the Trident area, which is, even if you took out Broad Street, that is still a lot of cars coming in and out. And it would seem to me that you wouldn't want to have people being dropped off in that area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bill, do you have a preference?
Me first, huh? No, this, I have to say, I mean, I think a lot of these can be made into working solutions, and by no means are any of them in a condition that they should be a preferred direction for a master plan yet. I mean, there's a lot of refinement needs to happen, but I think to the degree we can get a compact footprint at a place that's central to the new TOD area and as close to downtown as possible, a scheme like this is one that I would try to lean to and towards solving a set of principles we talked about initially, been walkability and helping set up a strong environment for economic development going into the future. The north side tends to lend itself to that. How about you, David?
Well, I actually like this one too, but I mean, one of the things I think we need more conversation about is what we mean by an iconic station and what that looks like. Because we've got these station footprints shown here, and the point Mike Marshall made earlier, it might feel like if the station footprint got bigger, it was a more iconic building. But what we've got in a number of cases, I mean, I don't know what that is. Maybe that's 150 feet long.
It's about 30,000 square feet.
Right, but it's probably about 30 or 40 feet high. And we don't typically think of iconic buildings as buildings that are 150 feet long and 30 feet high. We tend to think of iconic buildings as ones that have a tower, in a city hall. It might be a bell tower or something else, where there's some element of the building that's iconic or is visible from the distance. So really defining that and thinking about where you could see those iconic elements for and how we made it iconic. A lot of the most iconic buildings aren't that big. They just set themselves apart by the way they sit in public spaces, how they're defined by public spaces, how they connect to open space. And one of the other conversations I think we really haven't had here, and I was noticing as Tom was going through his presentation, earlier, he had coded the different land areas in 3 different ways. And I think one was potential development, area that was terra firma. The second was land that was over highway right-of-way. And the third was potential green space, or open space. And there wasn't actually any green on the drawings, but I think that's something that will begin to happen next, because some of the land area that's over on a cap is potential for green space. And some of our most iconic buildings are set on green space or adjacent to green space, and it's their relationship with that public space that makes them iconic. So I think that's another ingredient that's going to be added into these concepts as we go forward, as we try to define what an iconic station is and how an iconic station anchors this district wherever it goes.
Okay, I think we've got one more next step slide, and we're all set. Which is really amazing that with all of us team members up here in the room, we actually got it to just a little over 2 hours. But yeah, we want to incorporate the feedback we heard today, and I know there's a number of staff around the room taking notes, drawing things, so we've heard a lot of really good things today, and we're going to work that into some of our thinking. But we still have a lot of road configurations that need to be worked out. Like I said, this is very complex. Specifically, the Trident is going to continue to haunt us for a while, but I think we're honing in on some good ideas. And Gina and Jim and her crew are going to continue to refine these multimodal station concepts based on some of the things you just heard from Bill and Dave. We're presenting to the PAC next month. Hopefully we'll have moved some of these ideas a little bit further, but certainly all your input here tonight has really helped shape some of our thinking moving forward. So thank you very much. And as I said, we're going to continue to hang around for a little bit if you want to continue to come up and ask us questions.
My name is Jay Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. You spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.